Have you ever noticed how the most awakened figures, Jesus, Buddha, even the old Zen monks, all spent time alone? Not because they rejected love, but because they wanted to understand it beyond attachment. Alan Watts said the same thing, that solitude is where the self dissolves and truth begins to speak. Maybe staying single isn't avoidance. Maybe it's the space where awareness becomes love itself. If that feels true, stay. And let's explore why the spiritually awake so often walk alone, and why they never see it as loneliness. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Completion. We grow up with a quiet assumption that love is something we must find, as though wholeness were hidden inside another person, waiting for discovery. Every story we're told reinforces it. Songs, films, family conversations, all reminding us that being single means being incomplete. We start to see life as a puzzle, and ourselves as the missing piece that can only be completed when someone else arrives. It's an illusion so subtle that most of us never question it. Alan Watts often spoke about the illusion of separation, the idea that there is a you standing apart from the rest of existence, reaching out to grasp what it lacks. But in reality, he said, this separation is only a trick of perception, an echo of language and thought. Just as a wave is not separate from the ocean, you are not separate from the fabric of life itself. The moment that understanding deepens, the desperate search for completion begins to dissolve. Being single then becomes not a void to be filled, but a state of clarity. The spiritual person does not avoid love, but sees through its distortions. They recognize that much of what we call romance is a mirror of our conditioning, the mind's attempt to reclaim what it imagines is missing. When we say, "I want someone who completes me," what we often mean is, "I want someone who makes me forget my own discomfort." Yet that relief is temporary. The deeper work begins when you stop using another person to quiet your own unease, and instead turn inward to meet it. In solitude, you begin to hear the soft hum beneath the noise. There is no performance, no role to maintain, no reflection of yourself in another's eyes to manage. At first, this can feel unsettling because it exposes the very belief that love was meant to cover up, the fear that you are not enough. But if you stay with that feeling long enough, something begins to shift. You notice that the silence isn't empty, it's alive. Awareness itself becomes a kind of companionship, steady and unconditional. Watts once said that to be lonely is to deny the universe in yourself. In solitude, you stop denying. You begin to see that what you sought outside was never missing inside. Psychology describes this pattern through the lens of attachment. Our brains evolved to seek connection. Oxytocin and dopamine make closeness rewarding. But over time, we confuse the biological reward with spiritual truth. We begin to believe that love's purpose is to fix the feeling of incompleteness. When the reward fades, as it always does, the cycle of craving begins again. Spiritually awake people recognize this loop and step out of it. They stop chasing chemical echoes and start cultivating presence. The comfort they find in solitude is not the comfort of isolation, but of alignment, the sense that nothing more is required to be whole. In relationships, we tend to use others as mirrors. We see in them the parts of ourselves we've not yet accepted, the need for validation, the fear of abandonment, the desire to be chosen. This mirroring can be powerful, even healing, but it can also become a trap if we mistake the mirror for the self. Watts would remind us that the person we fall in love with often represents the qualities our own soul longs to recognize. To stay single consciously is to turn that mirror inward, to see yourself directly without projection. You stop asking others to show you who you are and begin to discover it quietly on your own. This does not mean rejecting love or avoiding intimacy. In fact, it prepares you for deeper connection. When love no longer arises from need but from abundance, it transforms. You no longer cling to another person to escape solitude because you have already befriended it. You can meet someone not to complete a lack, but to share a fullness. Watts said that when two people are truly awake, their relationship becomes like two musical instruments playing in harmony, distinct yet united by the same melody. That harmony only appears when both know they are whole on their own. Society often glorifies the opposite. It tells us that partnership is the natural endpoint of growth, that solitude is merely a waiting room. But the spiritually awake person knows that waiting for completion keeps you asleep. Every time you postpone your peace until someone arrives, you reinforce the illusion that peace depends on circumstance. The truth is that you can only meet love from the place of wholeness. Otherwise, you meet your own fear wearing another's face. Being single, then, is not about detachment or self-sufficiency in the cold sense. It's about freedom from the constant measurement of worth through another person's attention. It's a return to direct experience, the sunlight on your skin, the breath entering your lungs, the quiet pulse of being alive. When those simple things are enough, love stops being a transaction and becomes an expression of awareness. Watts often laughed at how seriously the modern mind takes the idea of finding the one. He'd say that life is already dancing through you. The question is not whether someone will join the dance, but whether you're willing to feel the music. When you understand this, singlehood no longer feels like absence. It becomes space, open, creative, and alive with possibility. The illusion of completion fades when you realize you were never missing anything. The search that began with longing ends with recognition. The same consciousness that watches the sunrise, that breathes through you now, is the same one that connects all beings. There is no other half, only different reflections of the same whole. When this truth settles deeply, love changes shape. You no longer look outward in desperation, but inward in gratitude. You can love others freely because you are no longer trying to extract yourself from them. You can be single and still feel profoundly connected because the connection is not between two people. It is between you and existence itself. And that, Watts might say, is the beginning of real intimacy. To be at peace in your own being, to stop searching for completion, and to finally recognize that you were never incomplete at all. Chapter 2. The Ego's Quiet Trick. The ego is a master storyteller. It doesn't speak loudly, nor does it shout its illusions into our minds. It whispers. It tells us that we are separate from the world around us, that we are small and unfinished, and that only when another person sees us, desires us, or loves us, will we become complete. It says, "You are incomplete until you are chosen." And because the whisper feels so personal, so intimate, we believe it. We chase it through relationships, careers, achievements, and fantasies, trying to patch the invisible hole that was never really there. Alan Watts called this the great mischief of the human mind, the creation of a false self that believes it must prove its existence through comparison and attachment. To understand this trick, we have to see how the ego works. It feeds on separation. It survives by dividing life into categories: me and you, good and bad, success and failure, single and taken. The moment we accept those divisions as absolute, the ego begins to grow stronger. It wants recognition, validation, and proof. It craves an audience. In relationships, it hides behind love but operates through fear. Will they leave me? Do they still care? Am I enough? These questions don't come from genuine connection. They come from the ego's panic at the possibility of disappearing. Watts explained that the ego is not a tangible thing. It's a pattern of thought, a habit of mind that constantly tries to draw boundaries around what cannot be contained. The self we think we are is more like a story being told in time, constructed by memory, reinforced by social feedback, and guarded by fear. When this false self seeks love, it does not seek union but reinforcement. It wants someone to confirm its existence. The irony is that the moment someone does, the ego becomes anxious again, terrified of losing the validation it depends on. This is why even the most passionate relationships can turn fragile. The love that began as connection becomes a contract between two egos trying to protect their images. Spiritually awake people begin to notice this pattern. They see how the ego disguises its fear as romance, how it uses attachment as camouflage. They start to recognize that the search for love, when driven by the ego, is not about intimacy at all. It's about survival. The ego says, if I'm loved, I exist. If I'm alone, I vanish. But Watts reminds us that true existence does not need an audience. Existence is self-evident. Just as the sun does not need to be admired to shine, your being does not require another person's approval to be real. Psychology gives this the name external validation bias. Our brains evolved to seek approval because, for most of human history, acceptance meant survival. Being part of a tribe kept us safe. But in modern times, this ancient mechanism has fused with the ego's stories. We don't just seek safety anymore. We seek significance. We want to be special, unforgettable, desired. The problem is that significance built on comparison or dependence is fragile. The moment someone withdraws attention, the illusion collapses. That collapse feels like heartbreak, but at its core, it's the ego losing its reflection. Watts saw love as something much deeper than attraction or dependence. To him, love was the recognition of unity, the awareness that you and the other are not truly separate. When this awareness arises, love no longer feels like possession. You don't cling to the other person because you don't see them as an object to keep. You see them as an expression of the same consciousness that you are. But to reach that state, one has to first see through the ego's trick. As long as love is used to confirm identity, it will bring as much fear as joy. Think of how many relationships are built on the quiet hope of being saved. One person unconsciously believes that the other will heal their loneliness, while the other believes they will be healed in return. Both end up disappointed, not because love fails, but because illusion cannot carry the weight of salvation. Spiritually awake people recognize this and choose to pause rather than repeat the same pattern. They choose singlehood not out of bitterness or rejection of love, but out of clarity. In solitude, there is no audience to perform for, no reflection to chase. The ego loses its usual mirrors, and what remains is awareness itself, still, spacious, unthreatened. That stillness can feel uncomfortable at first. The ego resists it because it cannot survive without movement. It thrives on narrative, on goals, attachments, conflicts. But when you stay long enough in the quiet, something begins to shift. The need to be someone special starts to dissolve. The constant comparison, who loves more, who wins, who loses, fades into irrelevance. In that fading, freedom begins. Watts described this as the moment when the game of self and other becomes transparent. You still play, but you no longer believe the game is real. From a spiritual perspective, this recognition changes everything about love. Instead of looking for someone to fill your emptiness, you approach others from fullness. Instead of fearing abandonment, you understand that nothing can truly leave you, because all forms arise from the same source and return to it. This doesn't make you detached. It makes you capable of deeper compassion. You no longer love because you need. You love because you are. Love becomes a state of awareness, not a transaction. To see through the ego's trick is not a single realization, but a gradual process of remembering. You notice the subtle ways the mind tries to create identity through contrast. You catch yourself comparing your journey, your beauty, your relationship status, and you pause. You breathe. In that pause, you remember what Watts said. You are something the whole universe is doing, in the same way that a wave is something the whole ocean is doing. The ego tries to shrink that truth into something personal. I am special or I am unworthy, but awareness has no such limits. It simply is. When you live from that awareness, singlehood no longer feels like a gap to be filled. It becomes a mirror for presence. You start to see that peace does not depend on being seen. You realize that what you thought was loneliness was only the space where ego used to speak. And in that silence, life feels lighter, more honest. You can engage with others freely, without manipulation or need. You can love without losing yourself. This is why spiritually awake people often choose to remain single for long periods. It's not withdrawal, it's refinement. They are learning to live without the ego's constant commentary, to stop mistaking attention for existence. When they eventually meet someone, the relationship that follows is not a negotiation between two egos, but a dance between two beings who recognize the same consciousness in each other. There's no you complete me. There's only we are. The ego's quiet trick will always try to return. It's part of being human. But once you see it clearly, its power fades. You begin to smile at it, the way you smile at a child's game you've outgrown. You can still love, still connect, still care deeply, but you no longer confuse love with validation. You no longer chase reflection. You rest in being. And that, as Watts might say, is when you finally stop trying to prove that you exist and simply begin to live. Chapter 3: The Sacred Pause. There is a moment in every person's journey when the noise of wanting quiets down, even just for a breath. That silence can feel unfamiliar at first, almost unsettling, because we've grown used to movement. Plans, conversations, messages, attention. We measure our value by motion, by the things that happen to us or the people who appear beside us. Yet there comes a point when the spirit grows tired of all that reaching, and something within us whispers, "Stop." This is the beginning of what Alan Watts would call the sacred pause. It is the space between longing and fulfillment, a state of being where nothing needs to happen for life to feel complete. To the world, this pause might look like stillness, like nothing is moving. Friends may ask if you're lonely, or if you're waiting for someone to come along. But on the inside, something far deeper is unfolding. The sacred pause is not an absence. It's a presence that grows stronger the more you stop trying to fill it. It's the quiet in which the false layers of the self begin to loosen. The expectations, the comparisons, the story that says you need to be in love to be real. When you are alone long enough to hear your own thoughts without distraction, you start to recognize which of them truly belong to you and which were borrowed from others. Watts once said that most people are afraid of silence because silence reveals the truth of what they are. We fill our lives with sound and interaction to avoid meeting ourselves directly. The spiritually awake person does the opposite. They turn toward that silence, not away from it. They treat solitude like an instrument through which they can listen more deeply to existence itself. In that stillness, the distinction between being single and being connected begins to fade. There is no longer a me that is waiting and a them that is missing. There is only this unfolding awareness, complete in its own rhythm. This kind of stillness isn't easy to accept at first. The mind resists it because the mind survives through movement. It wants to keep solving problems, finding new desires, rehearsing old conversations. When you decide to pause, the ego panics. It tells you you're wasting time, that you're falling behind, that other people are out there living while you're standing still. But that panic is just a reflex. It's the sound of illusion breaking apart. Every time you return to the quiet, the stories lose a bit of their power, and something more authentic begins to appear beneath them. The sacred pause is not about withdrawal or isolation. It's about awareness. It's the state of seeing clearly without rushing to change anything. In this space, you begin to notice how much of what you call love has been shaped by expectation. How often we fall into relationships not because we are ready to share, but because we are afraid to face our own company. In solitude, you start to see that fear for what it is. You realize that loneliness is not the absence of others, but the absence of connection to yourself. Once you sit with that truth long enough, it transforms. The silence that once felt heavy begins to feel luminous. Watts compared this process to music. He said that in every melody, the pauses between notes are as important as the sounds themselves. Without those pauses, the music becomes noise. Life is the same. The periods of stillness, the seasons of being alone, are not empty. They are the very structure that gives meaning to the rest. When you rush to fill every pause with activity or company, you flatten the rhythm of your own being. But when you learn to rest inside the pause, you rediscover harmony. You begin to sense that even in the absence of love, attention, or movement, something vibrant is always alive within you. Science offers its own version of this wisdom. Neurologists have found that moments of rest in the brain, when you're not focused on tasks or conversation, activate what's called the default mode network. It's in these intervals that creativity, memory integration, and self-awareness deepen. The same principle applies spiritually. In the sacred pause, your awareness reorganizes itself. You stop reacting and start observing. You become the witness rather than the character. And from that witness space, everything changes. For many, singlehood becomes the natural setting for this pause. It's the season of life where you can finally stop performing. Without the constant mirroring of another person, you're free to listen, to ask questions that rarely find space in conversation. What do I really want? What makes me feel alive when no one is watching? These are not questions of preference, but of essence. They slowly pull you back to the truth that your worth is not measured by who stays or leaves, but by your ability to be at peace in your own presence. Watts often reminded his listeners that the present moment is all we ever have, yet it is the one thing we consistently try to escape. We run from now into tomorrow, chasing outcomes, relationships, or recognition that might make now more bearable. But awakening happens when you finally stop running. The sacred pause is that stopping. It's when the future loses its promise of rescue and the past loses its authority to define you. You realize that life has never been waiting somewhere else. It has always been here, in this breath, in this awareness. If you let it, this pause becomes a kind of mirror. You begin to see your patterns with gentleness rather than judgment. The ways you used to cling, the fears that drove your choices, the expectations you inherited without question. And as you watch them arise and fade, you notice something extraordinary. You are still here, untouched by them. The watcher is constant. That recognition is the seed of freedom. It's the point where you stop identifying with every thought and emotion and begin to rest in the space behind them. In time, what once felt like emptiness begins to feel sacred. You find beauty in quiet mornings, in the absence of messages, in the sound of your own breathing. You start to understand that peace isn't the result of having everything you want. It's the presence that remains when wanting falls silent. From that place, love, if and when it comes, feels different. It's no longer a rescue mission or a distraction. It's simply another expression of the same awareness you've already discovered within yourself. That's why the spiritually awake don't rush to leave the pause. They know it's not a void to escape, but a doorway to understanding. To sit in it is to rediscover life without conditions, to see yourself without masks, to feel the simple, effortless completeness of being. When Watts said that the meaning of life is just to be alive, this is what he meant. Not constant motion, not the endless search for more, but the quiet recognition that in the stillness between moments, everything is already enough. And so the sacred pause becomes a kind of homecoming. You no longer see singlehood as an empty chapter, but as the space in which all true beginnings take shape. In that stillness, you learn that presence itself is the only companion that never leaves. The ego calls it waiting, but the soul knows better. It is remembering. It is returning to the unbroken rhythm beneath all the noise, to the gentle truth that you were never incomplete, only distracted. Chapter 4. Alone but not lonely. There is a difference between being alone and being lonely, though the two often wear the same face. Loneliness is a hunger. It carries the ache of absence, the feeling that something essential is missing. Aloneness, on the other hand, is fullness. It is the recognition that nothing is missing, that life is already happening completely through you. To be alone in this way is not a punishment, but a return to your own company, to the steady rhythm of existence without comparison or expectation. Alan Watts believed that most of our suffering comes from confusing these two states. We run from solitude because we've been taught to equate it with emptiness, when in truth, it's the place where awareness becomes most alive. He often said that if you cannot be at peace by yourself, you will never find peace with another. Love built on fear of solitude becomes dependency. It is a relationship between two incomplete halves, each hoping the other will erase their emptiness. That kind of love is fragile because it begins from lack. But when solitude is embraced, love becomes a choice rather than a need. You no longer reach for someone out of desperation. You meet them from the fullness of your own being. In this sense, learning to be alone is not about closing yourself off. It is about opening in a different way, inward rather than outward, until you can feel the quiet pulse of life that exists even when nobody is watching. The modern world makes this difficult. We live in constant connection, notifications, messages, endless scrolling through other people's lives. Silence is rare, and when it does appear, it can feel almost frightening. The moment the noise fades, the mind rushes to fill it. Plans, memories, imagined conversations. Yet this discomfort is exactly what solitude asks us to meet. Watts would say that we are afraid of being alone because, in solitude, the ego loses its mirrors. Without other people to define us, we can no longer maintain our familiar roles: the successful one, the kind one, the loved one, the desired one. All that remains is being itself, and for many, that feels like nothing. But that nothing is everything. It is the space where truth begins. Think of it like sitting by the ocean. At first, you hear the waves as noise, endless, repetitive, meaningless. But after a while, the sound begins to change. It stops being background and becomes presence. You start to hear the rhythm, the subtle shifts in tone, the pauses between waves. The ocean hasn't changed. Your awareness has. Solitude works the same way. When you sit in it long enough, loneliness transforms into stillness, and stillness turns into peace. The silence doesn't disappear. You simply stop fighting it. Science describes something similar in the practice of mindfulness. When the brain is allowed to rest in quiet focus, the stress circuits begin to deactivate, and the sense of self versus world softens. What once felt like isolation begins to feel like integration. The boundary between me and everything else grows thinner until you can't quite tell where you end and the world begins. Watts might say that this is not a psychological trick, but a glimpse of how reality actually is. An interconnected process, not a collection of separate selves. When you are alone and no longer lonely, you are not disconnected. You are merged back into that process. The spiritually awake person does not avoid relationships. They simply no longer depend on them for meaning. They understand that togetherness is most beautiful when it is chosen freely, not clung to out of fear. That freedom is born from time spent in one's own company, learning to listen without expectation. You begin to notice small miracles, how the light moves across the wall during the day, how breath feels against the inside of your ribs, how time stretches and softens when you stop reaching for distraction. These are not dramatic revelations. They're the subtle reminders that existence has always been enough. Watts often laughed at how human beings treat aloneness like a problem to be fixed. We spend our lives running from ourselves, he said, and then wonder why we never catch peace. To sit alone, even for a few minutes, is to do something radical in a world addicted to noise. It is to choose being over becoming. The ego resists it fiercely because it thrives on constant affirmation, likes, messages, reactions, faces. But awareness does not need affirmation. It only needs space. Solitude gives it that space. Over time, what begins as discomfort becomes familiarity, then affection, and finally, something sacred. There's a quiet dignity in people who are comfortable alone. They move through the world softly, unhurried, carrying an invisible self-assurance that doesn't depend on recognition. They listen more than they speak, and when they love, it feels like an offering rather than a demand. Watts might say they have discovered the center of the circle, the still point around which all movement happens. From that center, loneliness can't touch you, because there is no gap between you and life. You are not standing apart from it. You are it. Sometimes this understanding arrives suddenly, in a moment of unexpected quiet, a morning where everything feels spacious, a night walk where you sense the world breathing with you. Other times it comes slowly, through practice, through the daily act of choosing silence over noise, patience over urgency. However it comes, the result is the same. Solitude stops feeling like absence and begins to feel like intimacy. You no longer wait for company to feel connected. You begin to experience connection in everything: the wind against your skin, the rhythm of your steps, the pulse of your own heart. Loneliness shrinks when it is looked at with awareness. What we call loneliness is often the resistance to being with ourselves, the refusal to rest in presence. When resistance softens, what's left is tenderness. You begin to care for yourself the way you would for someone you love. You prepare meals with attention. You rest without guilt. You treat your own thoughts with patience. This is not self-absorption, it's self-relationship, the foundation of all other forms of love. Watts once said that to understand yourself is to be at home anywhere. When you make peace with solitude, every place becomes home. The need to constantly surround yourself with people fades, replaced by a quiet confidence that wherever you are, life accompanies you. The trees, the air, the sounds, the light, all of it becomes part of your conversation with existence. You realize that you were never truly alone, only unaware of how deeply connected you already were. To be alone but not lonely is to have passed through the fear of emptiness and found fullness waiting on the other side. It is to sit quietly and feel no need to escape. It is to discover that love does not begin between two people. It begins in the simple act of being with yourself, without running away. And from that wholeness, every relationship, every friendship, every moment of connection becomes richer, freer, and more real. This is the gift of solitude that spiritually awake people understand. It is not a withdrawal from the world, but a return to it, unguarded and complete. When you can sit in silence and feel the pulse of life moving through you, you realize that you were never missing anyone at all. The loneliness fades, not because someone arrives, but because you have finally arrived. To Yourself, Chapter 5. Love without possession. Love, as most people understand it, is full of subtle conditions. It's a quiet negotiation. I'll stay as long as you make me feel safe, wanted, understood. Beneath the language of affection hides a pattern of ownership. We speak of my partner, my person, my love, as though another human being could ever truly belong to us. Alan Watts often warned about this confusion, that when love becomes a form of possession, it stops being love at all. The moment we try to hold it, it changes shape, hardens, and begins to decay. Real love, he said, is like breathing. It happens naturally when we stop trying to control it. Spiritually awake people come to see this distinction not as an abstract philosophy, but as something learned through experience. Many of us enter relationships believing we are sharing love when we are actually trading reassurance. We give affection in exchange for stability, attention, or identity. And for a time, it works. We feel grounded in the presence of another person, and that comfort feels like proof of love. But sooner or later, control slips through our fingers. The other person changes, pulls away, or simply begins to live according to their own rhythm. What we called love turns into anxiety. We begin to fear loss, jealousy arises, and the ego mistakes its panic for devotion. Watts called this the trap of attachment. To be attached, he said, is to confuse permanence with security. But life itself is impermanent. Trying to freeze love in place is like trying to trap sunlight in your hands. The tighter you hold, the faster it disappears. When spiritually awake, people speak of freedom in love. They don't mean detachment in the cold sense. They mean a form of love that allows everything to breathe. Themselves, the other person, and the relationship itself. Love, when it is pure, is not a contract. It is awareness. It is the recognition of beauty in another without demanding that it exist for your comfort. In this form, love becomes less about merging and more about meeting. Two beings, each whole, encountering one another with curiosity and care. There is no need to possess because nothing is lacking. Watts compared this to music. When you listen to a song, you don't rush to the end or demand that it repeat forever. You let it unfold moment by moment, knowing that its impermanence is what makes it beautiful. Love without possession carries that same rhythm. It moves, changes, and sometimes ends, but each note is complete in itself. This idea challenges everything we are taught about romance. From childhood, we are told that real love means exclusivity, permanence, and sacrifice. We measure devotion by how much we give up. But spiritual awakening reveals that love measured in control is not love at all. It's fear dressed up as virtue. The fear of being alone, the fear of losing, the fear of uncertainty. These fears build invisible walls around our hearts, and we mistake those walls for commitment. Real commitment, Watts would argue, is not about ownership. It's about presence. It's about showing up fully in each moment, knowing you cannot keep it forever. The ego resists this understanding because it thrives on ownership. It wants to claim and define my relationship, my partner, my story. It believes that to let love be free is to risk losing it. But in truth, you can only lose what you try to possess. Freedom doesn't destroy love, it deepens it. When love is not trapped in control, it begins to breathe again. It becomes less about promises and more about awareness, less about forever and more about now. Imagine sitting beside someone you care about deeply, watching the sunset. You don't need to hold on to the moment or the person. You simply share it. There's no script, no expectation, just the quiet recognition that this presence, this shared being, is enough. That is love without possession. It's not about trying to keep the other from leaving, but about cherishing the meeting while it happens. When the sun sets, the sky changes color, and eventually, night comes. Yet you don't curse the darkness. You understand that it's part of the same cycle that made the sunset beautiful. Science echoes this wisdom in its own way. Psychologists describe secure attachment not as dependency, but as the balance between closeness and autonomy. Healthy love allows two people to remain individuals while connecting deeply. Spiritually, it's the same principle. Love becomes sacred not when it binds, but when it frees. You stop asking, "Will you stay with me forever?" and instead begin to ask, "Can I meet you fully now and let you go when life asks us to?" Watts often pointed out that freedom and love are not opposites. They are two sides of the same coin. When you love someone truly, you don't cage them. You trust their path, even when it leads away from you. Possession creates anxiety, but freedom breeds trust. It allows both people to grow without fear that growth will destroy connection. Paradoxically, when you stop trying to keep someone, they often stay longer, not because they're trapped, but because they're seen and accepted as they are. This kind of love doesn't eliminate pain. Saying goodbye will still hurt. Distance will still ache. But the pain no longer feels like destruction. It feels like the natural rhythm of life moving through you. Spiritually awake people don't avoid that rhythm. They learn to flow with it. They understand that grief is not the opposite of love, but part of its expression. You grieve what was beautiful because it mattered, not because it was supposed to last forever. In the stillness of solitude, you begin to see how much energy goes into trying to control others. Subtle manipulation, expectation, fear. When that energy is released, something remarkable happens. Love becomes lighter. You find yourself loving people more freely, even strangers, because love is no longer a transaction. It's not a reward for loyalty or a privilege for the chosen few. It's a state of awareness that expands naturally when you're no longer afraid to lose. Watts said that to love is to let go of yourself, not to disappear, but to dissolve the boundary that says, "This is me, that is you." In that dissolution, something larger moves through you. Call it compassion, presence, consciousness. You begin to see that love was never about finding the right person or keeping them. It was about waking up to the reality that separation itself is the illusion. When that illusion fades, you can love anyone, anywhere, without fear. Love without possession is not weaker, it's wiser. It understands impermanence, honors freedom, and accepts that everything changes. It does not demand guarantees or titles because it doesn't need them. It is not dependent on reciprocation because it exists as its own state of being. You give not to be loved back, but because giving itself feels natural. You care because care is what flows through an open heart. When you reach this understanding, relationships no longer feel like cages or bargains. They become shared journeys, brief or long, each one teaching you something about yourself and the world. You don't cling, you accompany. You don't trap, you trust. And even when love ends, it doesn't die. It transforms, continuing as gratitude, as tenderness, as memory. Watts once said that life is not a problem to be solved, but a dance to be enjoyed. The same is true of love. You don't dance to reach a destination. You dance because moving together feels alive. In that dance, you realize that love without possession isn't less romantic. It's the only kind of love that survives the test of awareness. It's love as freedom, love as breath, love as the quiet recognition that nothing belongs to you, and yet everything is yours to cherish. Chapter 6. The Mirror of Desire. Every relationship we enter becomes a reflection, whether we see it or not. It's as if every person we love quietly holds up a mirror, showing us the parts of ourselves we most need to notice. Some mirrors make us glow. They reflect back our kindness, our capacity to care, our gentleness. Others disturb us. They reveal our insecurities, our fears, the hidden wounds we thought we had outgrown. This, Alan Watts would say, is the paradox of love. It is not simply an experience between two people, but an unfolding of self-recognition. The one we love becomes both a companion and a teacher, and sometimes, when the lesson is complete, they leave, not because the love failed, but because the reflection has served its purpose. Spiritually awake people begin to understand this pattern early. They notice how attraction often arises not from compatibility, but from resonance. We are drawn to others whose energy awakens something dormant in us, sometimes beauty, sometimes shadow. When you meet someone and feel an instant pull, it may not always be love at first sight. It might be a kind of recognition, your consciousness noticing its own reflection in another. The encounter feels magnetic because, at some deep level, you are being shown something about yourself. Watts often spoke of how our relationships are extensions of the mind. The world, he said, is not a stage filled with separate actors, but a continuous process of consciousness looking at itself from different angles. In this view, every connection is an opportunity to understand the larger whole, to see the unity that exists beneath the illusion of separation. When we mistake love for possession, we get trapped in the surface layer of the mirror. What the person looks like, what they give us, how they make us feel. But when we awaken, we begin to look through the mirror instead of at it. We start asking, what is this connection showing me about myself? Desire is often the first reflection we encounter. It can be intoxicating, blinding even. The mind tells a story. If I can have this person, I will finally be fulfilled. The truth is subtler. Desire is a teacher disguised as longing. It directs us toward parts of ourselves we have not yet met. Our capacity for joy, our craving for validation, our fear of loss. When we chase desire unconsciously, it turns into obsession. But when we observe it with awareness, it becomes a doorway to understanding. The spiritually awake person doesn't deny desire, they study it. They ask what it reveals, what it hides, and where it points. To look into the mirror of desire is to see your own reflection shimmering within another's eyes. It's to realize that the love you feel is not something they are giving you, but something being awakened inside you. You are, in a way, falling in love with a part of yourself. This insight can be liberating and humbling at once. It means that even when someone leaves, the essence of what you loved remains. The feeling was never truly about them. It was about the capacity for love that was always yours. Psychology offers a similar insight through the concept of projection. We project our ideal traits and suppressed emotions onto others, believing we have found them outside of us. That's why lovers can feel like mirrors reflecting not only beauty, but also pain. The moment they stop mirroring what we want to see, the illusion shatters, and we feel betrayed. But spiritually, nothing has been lost, only revealed. Watts would say that heartbreak is not the breaking of love, but the breaking of illusion. When the mirror cracks, you see yourself more clearly. This doesn't mean relationships should be avoided. Quite the opposite. Relationships are where these reflections become visible, where the unconscious meets the conscious. But what changes is the way spiritually awake people engage with them. They no longer see the other as a savior or a solution. They see them as a fellow traveler, a soul moving through the same ocean of awareness. Each interaction, each moment of affection or conflict becomes a lesson in perception. You begin to notice when you are reacting from ego, when you are projecting need, and when you are truly meeting the other as they are. Watts believed that true intimacy can only arise when the mirror is clear, when you are no longer seeing through layers of expectation. Most relationships, he said, fail not because love fades, but because the image we built of the other person collapses. We fall in love with our own reflection of who we think they are. When reality differs, we grieve the loss of the image, not the person. To awaken spiritually is to love beyond image, to love without trying to possess or perfect what you see. The mirror of desire also teaches patience. In moments of longing or jealousy, awareness reminds you to pause and look within. What is this feeling trying to tell me? What part of myself feels unseen, unworthy, or incomplete? Instead of blaming the mirror for the reflection, you turn your gaze inward. In doing so, you reclaim your power. The person in front of you no longer dictates your peace. They may still inspire or challenge you, but they no longer control your state of being. That shift is the quiet mark of maturity, when you can see desire as a reflection rather than a chain. There's a story Watts once told about the moon and the lake. The moon, shining above, reflects perfectly in the still water. But the moment the surface ripples, the reflection shatters. We often confuse the reflection for the moon itself, mistaking the temporary image for the eternal source. Love works the same way. When the lake of our mind is calm, the reflection of another that can reveal something divine. But when the mind is restless, the image distorts. The spiritually awake person learns not to chase the broken reflection, but to look up, to the source that was never lost. Over time, this understanding changes how you relate to others. You become gentler, less reactive. You no longer demand that people stay in your life to preserve your sense of self. You appreciate them as mirrors, some reflecting light, some shadow, all serving their purpose. Even difficult relationships, the ones that hurt or end abruptly, become teachers. So they show you where you are still attached, where you still seek external validation, where the ego still clings to illusion. Each reflection brings you closer to seeing yourself clearly. To love consciously is to hold the mirror lightly. You allow others to reflect you without forcing them to be your definition. You appreciate the reflection without mistaking it for the truth. You begin to understand that the person who made you feel loved didn't give you that love. They reminded you of it. The mirror showed you what was always inside. And once you see it, you can no longer forget it. You realize that love in its purest form is self-recognition through another. When you reach this point, solitude takes on new meaning. Being alone no longer feels like deprivation, because you can see reflections everywhere, in the sky, in the wind, in the faces of strangers. You carry within you the memory of all the mirrors you've ever met, and through them, you've met yourself. Watts might say that this is the quiet miracle of awakening, discovering that every desire was a doorway back to the same truth, that you were never incomplete, only unaware of your own reflection. To look into the mirror of desire and not be deceived by it is one of the greatest forms of freedom. It doesn't make love smaller, it makes it infinite. You no longer cling to one reflection, because you've recognized the source shining behind them all. And so, when the mirror fades, as all mirrors eventually do, you simply bow in gratitude, not for what you lost, but for what it revealed. Chapter 7. The Wholeness of Now. We are always trying to arrive somewhere. In conversations, careers, relationships, even in spirituality, there is this quiet pulse of striving beneath everything we do. It's as if every moment is just a preparation for the next, a bridge we must cross to finally reach a place where life begins to make sense. Alan Watts often described this as the greatest misunderstanding of the modern mind, the belief that life is a journey with a destination rather than an unfolding that is already complete. He said that we spend our days chasing the mirage of someday, forgetting that reality has never existed anywhere but now. To be awake, he reminded us, is not to find something new, but to recognize what has been here all along. The spiritually awake person begins to sense this truth after countless cycles of seeking. The pattern becomes visible. We fall in love thinking it will make us whole. We achieve something thinking it will bring peace, and each time the feeling fades. The ego promises satisfaction, but always attaches it to the next thing, a future event, a person, a breakthrough. This movement of the mind is so constant that we mistake it for living. Yet it is more like dreaming. Watts compared it to a dog chasing its own tail, forever in motion, never realizing that what it seeks is already part of itself. When you stop running, even for a moment, a strange stillness appears. You may sit alone in your room or walk outside and notice that the air feels different, not because it has changed, but because you have stopped trying to change it. Awareness begins to open. This is what Watts called the eternal present, the realization that every experience you've ever had has only ever happened in one place, now. The past is memory, the future is imagination, and both arise within this same present moment that never ends. To live here, in this unfolding wholeness, is to step out of the illusion of waiting. The modern world resists this understanding. It is built on productivity, goals, and progress. We are told that happiness is something to work toward, that peace is the reward for effort. But spiritual awakening inverts this logic. Peace isn't a prize. It's the ground beneath every step. Watts used to say that the purpose of dancing is not to arrive at a particular spot on the floor, but to enjoy each movement as it happens. Life, he said, is exactly the same. The moment you start treating it as a race, you forget the rhythm, you lose the music. This idea can sound simple, but is profoundly difficult to live. The mind is addicted to movement because it fears stillness. Stillness feels like death to the ego, a state where control dissolves and the story of I pauses. That's why so many people find it unbearable to be alone or to have nothing to do. The silence exposes how deeply we've tied our worth to motion. Yet it is only in that silence that wholeness can reveal itself. The spiritually awake person learns to sit in the stillness until the discomfort softens, and beneath it, they begin to feel something vast, quiet, and steady, a presence that needs nothing to complete it. Science, in its own language, mirrors this truth. Studies on mindfulness show that when the mind settles into present awareness, the regions associated with rumination and anxiety begin to quiet. The brain shifts from prediction to perception, from fear to clarity. The body relaxes, the breath deepens, and a sense of coherence arises. Everything feels connected again. This is not mystical, it's biological. Awareness brings the system into alignment. Watts simply translated that science into poetry. When you stop trying to hold the river, you realize you are the river. The wholeness of now is not something you can earn or maintain. It is already the case. It's the backdrop of existence, unbroken by time or thought. But to experience it directly, you have to stop postponing life. You have to stop saying, "I'll be happy when," or "I'll start living after," and see that such phrases are traps. The spiritually awake person begins to notice how subtle this postponement is. It hides in the smallest habits, checking the phone for distraction, waiting for someone's reply, planning the next goal. All of it reinforces the idea that this moment is insufficient. Awakening begins when you refuse to negotiate with that idea any longer. When you bring your attention back to the present, something tender happens. You begin to feel connected again, not through effort, but through awareness. The sound of the world returns. Wind, birds, footsteps, the rhythm of your breath. The mind slows enough to see how each moment contains its own completion. There is no missing piece because the moment itself is whole. Watts described it beautifully. You do not look out there for the meaning of life. The meaning is in looking. The act of perceiving, of being aware, is the point. Nothing needs to be added. In this wholeness, even solitude changes texture. Being single no longer feels like being in between chapters, but like standing inside a living book that writes itself as you breathe. You are not waiting for someone to appear or for circumstances to align. You are participating fully in what is. Love, when it arises, is no longer a desperate search for completion, but a natural overflow of presence. It comes not from need, but from abundance. And if it fades, it doesn't destroy you because the source of your completeness was never outside you. To live in the wholeness of now is also to accept impermanence. Every moment passes, and yet awareness remains. The ego calls this loss. The awakened call it flow. You stop clinging to what is gone and stop chasing what might come. Instead, you allow each moment to arrive, unfold, and dissolve, knowing that another will rise from the same stillness. This is what Watts meant by letting life dance you. When you live this way, relationships become lighter, creativity becomes effortless, and even pain becomes meaningful. There is no wasted experience because everything belongs to now. Stillness doesn't mean inactivity. It means intimacy with the present. You can be walking, working, or laughing with friends and still be fully here. You don't have to withdraw from the world to experience wholeness. You simply have to stop looking elsewhere for it. When you do, life stops feeling like a series of conditions to meet and starts feeling like a living mystery to witness. You realize that there is nowhere to go, nothing to become. And yet, paradoxically, everything keeps unfolding perfectly. Watts often ended his talks with laughter, not out of mockery, but out of joy. He laughed because he saw the cosmic irony of it all. How hard we try to be what we already are. We meditate, pray, chase enlightenment, chase love, chase meaning, and then one day, we stop. We breathe. And in that single breath, we realize the chase was never necessary. What we were seeking was the very awareness that was doing the seeking. The wholeness of now is not something to understand intellectually. It's something to live. It's in the pause before a word, in the softness of morning light, in the quiet after a deep exhale. It's the feeling that this, right here, is enough. Not because it's perfect, but because it exists. Spiritually awake people don't find completion through control or achievement. They find it through presence. They stop waiting for life to begin and discover that it already has. To live in this way is to end the illusion of incompleteness. You stop reaching for what's next and start participating in what's here. You understand that the future is only the imagination of now, and the past is only its memory. Everything you've ever been searching for, peace, love, freedom, has been quietly waiting inside the present. The only requirement is to stop looking away. When you do, life doesn't suddenly change. You simply start to see it as it's always been, whole, undivided, and breathtakingly alive. Chapter 8. The Weight of Expectations. From the moment we are born, expectations begin to weave themselves around us like invisible threads. They come from parents, teachers, friends, religion, culture, and eventually from ourselves. We are told what a good life looks like. Get a job, find someone, get married, build a home, raise a family. We learn to measure our worth against how well we follow these milestones, and we rarely stop to question who decided that this was the map of fulfillment. Alan Watts used to call this the social hypnosis, the unconscious agreement to live by ideas that were handed down rather than discovered. For most people, the trance is lifelong. But for those who begin to awaken spiritually, something starts to stir beneath the surface. A quiet unease. A whisper that asks, "Is this really mine?" The weight of expectations is subtle but heavy. It shapes the way we think about love, success, and even our identity. When you're single, it tells you that you're incomplete. When you're partnered, it tells you to perform, to meet the standards of what love should look like. It pushes and pulls, keeping you in constant tension with the present moment. And the cruelest part is that the voice of expectation rarely sounds external anymore. It begins to echo from within. We internalize it until it becomes our own inner critic, our own invisible ruler measuring every part of our existence. Watts saw this as one of the core paradoxes of modern life. The more society evolves materially, the more people feel spiritually disconnected. We create endless systems of achievement, but lose touch with the sense of being alive. We chase roles and labels, forgetting that life existed long before the words we use to define it. He said that when you live only to fulfill expectation, you become an actor trapped in a play you didn't write. You perform the lines, you smile for the audience, but deep down you know something is missing: authenticity. Spiritual awakening often begins as a small act of rebellion against this performance. It doesn't require a grand gesture or a sudden enlightenment. It begins when you pause and notice how much of your life is motivated by should. I should be married by now. I should be more successful. I should be happier. Each should is a thread in the web of expectation, pulling you away from what is true. When you start to unravel it, there's fear at first. The fear of disappointing others, of stepping outside the script. But underneath that fear is freedom. The moment you stop performing, you can finally hear your own voice. In love, the weight of expectations is especially powerful. Society tells us that romantic partnership is the ultimate goal, the proof that we are worthy and chosen. This idea is so ingrained that even when people awaken spiritually, they can still carry guilt for being single, as if solitude were a flaw to be fixed. Watts would say that this guilt is not natural, it's learned. He often laughed at how absurd it was that human beings feel pressure to fit into molds that have nothing to do with their actual nature. You are under no obligation, he said, to be the person you were yesterday's story. The spiritually awake person begins to see that the structure of expectation is built on fear. Fear of rejection, fear of insignificance, fear of being different. When you start to dismantle those fears, the structure collapses on its own. You realize that being single doesn't make you incomplete. It makes you free from one of the heaviest forms of conditioning. You are no longer living life to be approved by someone else's timeline. You are living it according to your own rhythm, your own unfolding. This freedom allows for a kind of love that is far more authentic, because it isn't born from pressure. You love because you choose to, not because you're expected to. Watts often compared human life to nature. Trees don't grow because they are told to. They grow because that's what life does. They don't rush to flower earlier or worry about the opinion of the forest. Each one grows according to its own pattern. If one blooms later, it isn't less beautiful. It simply follows its timing. The spiritually awake person learns to live the same way. They stop forcing themselves into society's calendar. They understand that the seasons of their life don't need to match anyone else's. But letting go of expectations doesn't mean isolation or indifference. It means returning to sincerity. When you free yourself from the need to meet external standards, your choices start to align with what is true for you. You might still seek connection, build a family, or pursue success, but not because you are supposed to, because you genuinely desire to. The difference is subtle but transformative. It changes the quality of every experience. You no longer live to impress. You live to express. This shedding of expectations also alters how you relate to others. When you no longer hold yourself to impossible standards, you stop holding others to them as well. Relationships become lighter, kinder. You no longer expect another person to fulfill the roles that society has assigned. The savior, the soulmate, the constant source of happiness. You meet them as they are, without projecting an ideal onto them. Watts once said that love is not about finding the right person, but about seeing rightly. You can only see rightly when the lens of expectation has been cleared. The process of releasing expectations is not always peaceful. It can feel like dismantling a house you've lived in your whole life. There's disorientation, sometimes grief, because those expectations gave you identity. But as the walls fall, you begin to sense how much space has been there all along. You start to breathe again. You begin to understand that there is a world beyond should, and it is infinitely more alive. Modern psychology echoes this through the idea of self-determination theory, the finding that true well-being arises not from external reward, but from autonomy, competence, and connection. In other words, happiness grows when you act from your own values rather than external approval. Spiritual awakening takes that understanding even further. It's not just about choosing freely. It's about realizing that freedom is your nature. The pressure to become something else dissolves when you see that what you already are is enough. The weight of expectations lifts slowly, like fog at dawn. Each time you notice a should and choose sincerity instead, you reclaim a part of your energy. Over time, you begin to feel lighter. The voice that once demanded perfection grows quieter. You no longer need to prove your worth through relationships or accomplishments. You begin to live as you are, in rhythm with what life asks of you, not what the world demands. When Watts spoke to his audiences, he often smiled and said, You are under no duty to be anyone other than who you are in this moment. That truth still feels radical because it dismantles the entire machinery of expectation. It tells us that freedom doesn't come from achievement, but from permission. The permission to be exactly as we are, right now. Spiritually awake people embody that permission. They walk through the world with lightness, no longer weighed down by other people's scripts. They might still have dreams and goals, but those are born from curiosity, not pressure. To let go of expectations is to return to presence. It's to stop carrying the future as a burden and to start living the present as a gift. You no longer rush toward the life you think you should have. You begin to experience the life that's already unfolding. And in that unfolding, love appears naturally, not as obligation, not as achievement, but as awareness. When you reach that point, you finally understand what Watts meant when he said, "The meaning of life is just to be alive." You are not here to meet expectations. You are here to live fully and freely as yourself. Chapter 9. The Joy of Enough. In a world that celebrates more success, more love, more money, more validation, the idea of enough sounds almost like surrender. We're taught from an early age that satisfaction is dangerous, that it breeds laziness or complacency. The moment we achieve something, the question immediately appears: what's next? This constant movement keeps society running, economies growing, and egos hungry. But for spiritually awake people, as Alan Watts described, the pursuit of more eventually reveals itself as a trap, a treadmill that moves faster the harder you try to reach the end. True freedom begins the moment you step off that treadmill and realize that peace has nothing to do with accumulation. It has everything to do with contentment. Watts often spoke about how modern life turns human beings into perpetual seekers. We are always chasing something just out of reach. The next relationship, the next milestone, the next version of ourselves that will finally be happy. Yet, the moment we arrive there, satisfaction evaporates, and the chase begins again. He called this the chronic dissatisfaction of the human condition. It's the belief that happiness is always later, never now. But what if we've misunderstood what happiness really is? What if happiness doesn't live at the end of striving, but in the pause that follows acceptance? Spiritually awake people begin to notice this shift. They start to see that the joy they've been chasing is not something to be acquired, but something to be uncovered. The feeling of enough is not a lack of ambition. It's the recognition that the essence of life is already complete. When you eat, you taste. When you breathe, you feel. When you love, you experience connection. Nothing is missing from those moments except the mind's demand for more. Watts once said that the meaning of life is just to be alive. But modern people, he lamented, are so busy trying to make something of themselves that they forget to be. The joy of enough begins in stillness. When the noise of comparison fades, when you stop scrolling, stop measuring your life against others, something subtle emerges: gratitude. You start to notice how rich simplicity feels. A quiet morning, a familiar song, the warmth of light through a window. These aren't grand achievements. They're reminders. They whisper that existence itself is the miracle, and that the race for more is what blinds us to it. The spiritually awake understand this, not as an idea, but as a lived experience. They begin to move slower, speak softer, and choose deliberately. They realize that nothing external can add to the completeness of being alive. This doesn't mean rejecting ambition or material comfort. Watts never preached asceticism. He warned against the illusion that renunciation makes one virtuous, because even that can become a form of ego, pride in simplicity. Instead, he taught balance. Use what you need, appreciate what you have, and don't let what you own you. To find the joy of enough is to live with intentional awareness. You can still strive, still dream, but the striving comes from curiosity, not craving. It's not an attempt to fill a void. It's an exploration of what already overflows. Modern psychology agrees. Studies on contentment show that gratitude and mindfulness are linked to lower anxiety, higher resilience, and deeper relationships. When the mind is focused on sufficiency, it stops scanning for threats or deficiencies. The body relaxes. The nervous system resets. This is not passive happiness. It's active peace. To live with enough is to move through the world without clutching at it. You can love deeply without fearing loss, work hard without losing yourself, and rest without guilt. In relationships, this understanding changes everything. Spiritually awake people don't love from lack. They love from abundance. They don't enter relationships to complete themselves, but to share completeness. The moment you realize you are already enough, you stop demanding that others prove your worth. You no longer measure love by constant reassurance or intensity. You can simply be with another person, listening, laughing, breathing, without needing the moment to be more than it is. That is the quiet joy of enough, the recognition that every ordinary instant is sacred. Watts often pointed to nature as a teacher. Look at a tree, he would say. It doesn't rush to grow higher than the one beside it. It doesn't worry if its leaves are smaller this season. It simply grows because growth is what life does, not because it needs to prove itself. The tree is content in its being, and yet it continues to evolve. That's how human life could be: dynamic, creative, expanding, but never anxious about arrival. To be content does not mean to stop growing. It means to grow without fear. This is perhaps the hardest truth for modern consciousness to accept. We have built entire economies on dissatisfaction. Advertising works by convincing us that something is missing, that the next purchase, the next upgrade, the next experience will finally deliver wholeness. But it never does. Spiritually awake people are those who step out of this hypnosis. They are not against progress. They simply know that progress without peace is meaningless. The more they understand themselves, the less they need to prove anything. Their joy becomes quiet, almost invisible to the world, but deeply unshakable. There's an old Zen story Watts loved to share. A monk walks into a tea house, and the master pours him tea. The cup fills to the brim, but the master keeps pouring until the tea spills over. "Stop," the monk says. "The cup is full." The master smiles. "Exactly. You are like this cup, full of your own seeking. How can I show you anything unless you first empty it?" The joy of enough is like that emptying. Not a loss, but a clearing. It's the moment you realize that your cup was never meant to overflow with striving. It was meant to hold awareness. In solitude, this truth becomes most vivid. When you are single and no longer filling the space with noise or validation, you begin to sense how peaceful enough really feels. There's no one to impress, no script to perform, just the rhythm of breath, and the soft pulse of being. You begin to understand that contentment is not resignation, it's alignment. You can still welcome new experiences and people, but they are additions to a wholeness that already exists, not cures for a lack. The joy of enough also brings humility. You stop chasing the illusion that life owes you grand meaning. You begin to see that life is meaning itself, the play of existence happening through you. When you no longer demand that it be different, you start to appreciate its simplicity. Watts used to say that the attitude of faith is to let go and become open to truth, whatever it might turn out to be. That openness is born in contentment. It's the understanding that life, in all its imperfections, is already whole. To live this way is to rediscover wonder. You wake up and feel grateful, not because something special has happened, but because you're still here to notice. The smallest moments, light through dust, laughter from another room, the warmth of your own skin, become miracles. You realize that you don't need to own the world to feel alive in it. The world was never something to possess. It was something to participate in. And that is the quiet revolution of the spiritually awake. They stop chasing, and in doing so, they arrive. They find joy not in more, but in enough, in the stillness that says, "This is it." When you reach that place, the endless hunger dissolves. The noise of comparison fades. You stop running toward life because you've finally remembered where it has always been. Here, now, complete. And in that simple recognition, the heart smiles, the mind softens, and existence, in all its ordinariness, becomes extraordinary once again. Chapter 10. Love as awareness. There is a moment, often after the noise of chasing and longing fades, when love begins to take on a new shape. It stops being an emotion that rises and falls depending on who stands before you, and instead becomes something quieter, steadier, more spacious. Alan Watts often said that love, in its highest form, is not a feeling or a contract. It's awareness. It's the simple, unfiltered seeing of another being as they truly are, without judgment, without need, without the urge to possess or control. Love as awareness is not about attachment. It's about recognition. It is consciousness meeting itself through another. Most people confuse love with the sensations it produces: desire, excitement, affection, even pain. These are natural and beautiful, but they are not love itself. They are waves on the surface of a much deeper ocean. When you begin to awaken spiritually, you start to notice this difference. You see how often we mistake emotional intensity for truth, how we cling to people not because we love them, but because we want to sustain a particular feeling they awaken in us. The ego believes that to lose the person is to lose the feeling, and so it grasps, it fears, it controls. But love as awareness asks for none of that. It doesn't depend on duration or reciprocity. It simply recognizes the sacredness of what exists in this moment, then lets it flow naturally. Watts once described this shift as the transition from sticky love to free love. Sticky love binds. It says, "I need you to stay so I can remain whole." Free love allows. It says, "I see you, and in seeing you, I recognize myself." This form of love doesn't end when a relationship does. It doesn't shrink or fade because it was never confined to one person. It's the awareness that shines through every connection, every encounter, every act of compassion. Once you begin to see in this way, even strangers begin to feel familiar. You sense the same life breathing through everyone, the same consciousness looking back at you through 1,000 different eyes. Love as awareness changes the way you relate to others. When you meet someone, you no longer approach them as an object to understand or acquire. You don't analyze their worth based on how they make you feel or what they can offer. You simply allow them to exist as they are. This acceptance is not passive. It's the most profound act of respect. It means you no longer project your desires or fears onto another person. You see them without distortion. And in that clarity, love flourishes naturally, without effort or expectation. This is why the spiritually awake often seem calm in love. Their affection is not the feverish kind that burns bright and dies quickly. It is steady, like a candle sheltered from the wind. They do not confuse love with ownership or dependency. They understand that awareness is wide enough to hold both connection and separation, joy and loss, without losing balance. When the person they love is near, they are fully present. When they are gone, the awareness remains, unbroken. Watts described this as loving the dance rather than the dancer. The forms may change, but the rhythm, this awareness, never ends. From a psychological perspective, this shift mirrors what's called secure attachment. When you know yourself as whole, you no longer need others to prove your worth. You can bond without fear. You can love without grasping. Neuroscience even shows that mindfulness, the practice of present awareness, activates the same regions of the brain as experiences of love and compassion. Awareness itself becomes a biological form of love. Your nervous system learns to rest in openness rather than in vigilance. Watts believed that this state of love is our natural condition. The illusion of separateness, he said, is what turns love into a transaction. The moment you feel like a self apart from the world, you begin to treat love as a bridge between two islands, something fragile, easily lost. But when you awaken to the truth that there are no separate islands, only one vast ocean of being, love ceases to be a bridge and becomes the water itself. You don't have to maintain it or earn it. You are immersed in it, breathing it, expressing it through every glance and gesture. Living from this awareness makes even solitude feel alive. When you are alone, you do not feel the absence of love, because you see love in everything. The sound of rain, the way light moves through dust, the quiet intelligence of breath entering and leaving your body. You realize that love was never an exchange between two people. It was the field of awareness that made relationship possible in the first place. This understanding turns solitude into communion. You can be sitting alone in a room and still feel held by the world. In relationships, this awareness manifests as spaciousness. You stop trying to fix or save others. You listen without needing to be right. You can hold disagreement without it turning into distance. You give without calculation and receive without guilt. Love becomes less about fulfilling needs and more about sharing presence. You discover that true intimacy has nothing to do with constant closeness. It has to do with the depth of attention. When you see someone fully, when you let them be without interference, you are practicing love as awareness. Watts often used the metaphor of mirrors. He said that when two people truly love each other, they act as mirrors reflecting awareness back and forth until the illusion of separation fades. When you look deeply enough into the eyes of another, he said, you see yourself. This doesn't mean that love erases individuality, it honors it. Just as two waves can rise and fall distinctly while still being part of the same ocean, love as awareness allows difference to coexist with unity. You can appreciate another's uniqueness without needing to possess it. And in doing so, you experience a freedom that conditional love can never provide. This form of love also brings peace in loss. When relationships end or loved ones die, the pain is real, but the awareness behind it remains untouched. You mourn, but beneath the grief is an unspoken knowing that what you loved was never confined to form. The person may be gone, but the awareness through which you loved them, the consciousness that recognized beauty, kindness, and presence, is still here. That is why, for the spiritually awake, love never truly ends. It only changes form. Living with love as awareness means walking through the world with open eyes and an unguarded heart. It doesn't make you naive, it makes you attuned. You no longer need life to behave according to your plans in order to feel connected. Whether someone stays or leaves, whether things go well or fall apart, you continue to love, not out of duty, but out of understanding. You have seen through the illusion that love is scarce or fragile. You know now that love is the nature of awareness itself. Watts once said that when you realize this, the universe stops being a collection of things and becomes a conversation. Every moment, every person, every experience becomes an expression of that conversation. Awareness meeting itself in infinite forms. To live in this way is to be free, not because you've detached from life, but because you've merged with it. Love no longer depends on getting what you want. It becomes the act of seeing what already is. When you love as awareness, you stop asking the world to complete you. You begin instead to witness its beauty with reverence, knowing that every encounter, however brief, is sacred. You no longer measure love by duration or reciprocity, because you have found the one thing that cannot be lost: the capacity to see clearly, to feel fully, and to recognize yourself in all things. And in that seeing, life itself becomes love, quiet, effortless, and endlessly whole. Chapter 11. When connection returns. There is a beautiful irony in the spiritual path. The more deeply you learn to be alone, the more naturally you connect. Alan Watts often said that genuine connection can only emerge after solitude has done its work, after the heart no longer seeks another to fill its silence, but to share it. When you finally stop grasping for love as a means of completion, love finds you not as need, but as recognition. It isn't something you chase anymore. It's something you allow. At first, solitude feels like a kind of cleansing. You've untangled from old attachments, stepped away from the noise of dependency, and discovered peace in your own company. For a time, that peace feels enough, almost sacred. You begin to enjoy the freedom of not needing anyone, of being unshaken by the comings and goings of others. Yet, as that silence deepens, something unexpected stirs, a quiet longing, but not for rescue or distraction. It's the longing to share. Spiritually awake people often describe this as the point when solitude ripens into connection, not from emptiness, but from fullness overflowing into life. Watts believed this shift marks the difference between attachment and participation. In attachment, we approach others with expectation. You will make me feel safe, wanted, whole. But in participation, the self is already whole. Connection becomes a dance, not a transaction. Two people come together not to complete each other, but to experience life more vividly through the meeting. Each remains free, yet interwoven. Like two notes in harmony, they create something greater without losing their individual sound. When connection returns in this way, it no longer feels fragile. You no longer fear its loss because you're not holding it like a possession. You meet people as fellow travelers rather than saviors. You recognize that every encounter, brief or lifelong, has its purpose. Some come to awaken your tenderness, others to mirror your shadow. Some stay long enough to teach you depth, others simply pass through. But in all of them, you find echoes of the same consciousness looking back at you, the same light that once guided you through solitude. Love in this stage feels different. It is quieter but stronger, like a river that has learned to flow around stones rather than crash against them. You don't need constant affirmation because you are no longer using another person as proof of your worth. You no longer demand promises of forever because awareness has shown you that nothing is permanent, and that's what makes each moment precious. You stop asking, "Will this last?" and start asking, "Am I fully here while it does?" Watts often used the metaphor of the dance to describe this kind of love. When you dance, he said, you don't aim to reach a certain spot on the floor. The point of dancing is the dance itself. Connection is the same. It's not about destination, marriage, longevity, or security, but about presence. Each relationship becomes a song that plays for as long as it must. And when the music ends, you bow in gratitude instead of clinging to the silence. To live this way requires courage. The courage to love without guarantee, to open your heart, knowing it can be broken, and to trust that even heartbreak will deepen your awareness rather than destroy it. From a psychological point of view, this is what maturity in attachment looks like. When you have healed the fear of abandonment, connection transforms from dependency into choice. You love freely, not compulsively. You respect boundaries, both yours and theirs. You don't panic when space appears, because you know that love doesn't vanish in distance. It simply changes form. Spiritually, this maturity mirrors what Watts called letting the world happen to you without resistance. You allow others to come and go as life moves them, and in doing so, you find yourself connected to everything, not just someone. The spiritually awake person also recognizes that connection need not always be romantic. Friendship, community, even brief encounters with strangers become expressions of the same underlying unity. A moment of shared laughter, a deep conversation, or a simple act of kindness carries the same sacred weight as any grand love story. Awareness dissolves the hierarchy between relationships. It sees them all as threads in the same tapestry. In that view, nothing is trivial. Every meeting is an echo of the whole. What's remarkable is that when connection returns in this authentic way, it feels effortless. You no longer search for people who make you feel alive. You bring aliveness into the encounter. You don't perform to be liked. Your presence itself becomes the offering. Because you have already met yourself in solitude, you meet others without masks. That authenticity draws the right people toward you naturally. Relationships formed from this place are not about escape, they are about resonance. Two frequencies finding harmony because both are tuned to the same quiet awareness. Watts suggested that this kind of love cannot be manufactured through effort or strategy. It arises spontaneously, as naturally as flowers blooming in spring. You don't need to manipulate life to make it happen. You simply need to remain open. The moment you stop demanding connection, you make space for it to appear. It's as if the universe was waiting for you to stop clinging so it could finally deliver what you were ready to receive. This openness also allows you to experience loss differently. When someone leaves, you grieve, but not as a broken half mourning its missing piece. You grieve as a whole being acknowledging change. The love that once flowed toward them doesn't vanish. It simply expands, flowing into everything else. You begin to sense how nothing truly ends, that every connection continues in subtle ways, shaping who you become and how you see the world. Each person you have ever loved still exists as a living presence in your awareness. There's a deep peace in this understanding. You stop chasing forever and start living for now. You no longer confuse impermanence with loss. You realize that the beauty of connection lies in its fragility, the same way a cherry blossom's brief bloom makes it unforgettable. Spiritually awake people cherish this fragility. They don't fight it. They know that love doesn't need permanence to be real. It needs presence to be true. Watts often laughed about how human beings fear change while simultaneously being made of it. You are a process, he would remind his listeners, not a thing. When connection returns, you understand this not as an idea, but as a lived truth. You are not here to possess or to be possessed. You are here to flow, to meet, to touch, to transform, and to continue. The love you offer becomes part of the larger movement of life, extending far beyond individual stories. In this way, when connection returns, after awakening, it is not a step backward into attachment, but a step forward into participation. You don't withdraw from life in the name of detachment. You return to it fully awake. You allow yourself to be moved by love again, but now with the understanding that it was never meant to cage you. It was always meant to open you. To love like this is to live as awareness in motion. It's to meet each person, each moment, as an extension of the same wholeness you discovered in solitude. Connection no longer threatens your peace. It expresses it. And when love appears again, as it always does, you greet it not with desperation, but with recognition. You smile not because it completes you, but because you finally understand. You and love were never separate to begin with. Chapter 12. The flow of impermanence, everything changes. That is the only truth that never does. The stars that once formed constellations have already drifted apart. Mountains rise and erode. Rivers shift their course. Faces age. Voices fade. Alan Watts often reminded his listeners that impermanence is not a tragedy, but the very pulse of life itself, the current that keeps the universe alive. To resist it is to suffer. To flow with it is to awaken. For the spiritually awake, this is not an abstract idea, but a lived experience. The understanding that love, solitude, joy, and even sorrow are waves in the same ocean, each one appearing, cresting, dissolving, and returning again. Most people, however, spend their lives trying to hold still what was never meant to stay. We cling to relationships, to youth, to success, to identities carefully built from the stories we tell ourselves. We act as though permanence equals safety, as though life would somehow be better if it would just stop moving. But if the ocean were to freeze, it would die. Movement is not the enemy of peace. It is its condition. Watts described this beautifully. The more a thing tends to be permanent, the more it tends to be lifeless. To love, to live, to awaken, all of these require surrender to change. Impermanence often announces itself through loss. Someone we love leaves, or we wake up one morning and realize that a part of ourselves no longer fits the life we built. It hurts because the ego is built on continuity, the belief that I today is the same as I yesterday. When change disrupts that illusion, fear rises. The spiritually awake person learns to meet this fear with curiosity rather than resistance. They sit with the discomfort and watch it, noticing how even fear itself moves, shifts, and eventually fades. What is left after that fading is awareness, the space through which all forms come and go, untouched and unbroken. Watts often used the metaphor of music to describe this dance of change. In a song, each note matters only because it ends. The silence between the notes gives rhythm and meaning to the sound. If music were an endless, unchanging tone, it would cease to be music. Life is exactly the same. Its beauty depends on the pauses, the endings, the dissolving of moments, the heartbreak, the aging, the letting go with Steve Kasupis. These are not interruptions in the melody, but the melody itself. The spiritually awake person does not cling to the last note. They listen for the next one. In relationships, understanding impermanence transforms the way you love. You stop asking for guarantees. You no longer need to be promised forever, because you know that the moment itself is the only forever that exists. Love becomes more vibrant precisely because it is fragile. You learn to hold another person the way you would hold water, gently, openly, without trying to contain it. The ego says, I will love you as long as you stay the same. Awareness says, I love you through your becoming. This is the difference between possession and presence. Science, in its own language, affirms this truth. The body you inhabit is not the same one you had a few years ago. Cells die and regenerate. Atoms exchange with the air. Even your memories reshape themselves each time they're recalled. You are a process, not a product. A living river, not a static form. When you see this clearly, the idea of clinging begins to lose its appeal. The attempt to fix life in place becomes like trying to hold your breath. You realize that peace is not found in stillness, but in rhythm. You breathe in, you breathe out, you let go. Watts liked to remind his audience that impermanence is not something to overcome, but something to trust. The only way to make sense out of change, he said, is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance. Spiritually awake people don't stand at the edge of life trying to control the tempo. They step into the dance and let it move them. They know that to resist the flow is to suffer twice, once from the loss itself, and again from the refusal to accept it. But when you allow yourself to flow, loss becomes transformation, and endings become beginnings in disguise. This acceptance of impermanence also changes the way we experience solitude. In earlier stages of awakening, solitude can feel like a refuge, a still place away from the chaos of attachment. But as awareness deepens, solitude becomes dynamic. You begin to sense that even silence moves. Thoughts arise and dissolve. Emotions pass like weather through an open sky. You realize that there is no such thing as static peace. Even peace breathes. You stop looking for stability in the external world because you understand that stability is the capacity to remain open amid movement. In this flow, gratitude becomes natural. You start to cherish things not because they will last, but because they are here. The impermanent becomes sacred. The fleeting quality of life, instead of frightening you, starts to fill you with awe. Every sunrise, every conversation, every heartbeat feels like a gift that owes you nothing. You stop demanding permanence and start participating in wonder. Watts believed this shift, from ownership to participation, is what turns ordinary existence into art. Life is not something to be secured. It is something to be experienced fully before it changes shape again. This awareness also softens our grief. Loss still hurts, but the pain no longer feels like punishment. You understand that grief is the echo of love moving through the empty space left behind. It's what happens when awareness touches the impermanent. Spiritually awake people don't deny that ache. They let it speak. They let tears fall like rain, knowing that even sadness has a rhythm. In time, the pain doesn't disappear. It transforms into gratitude, into tenderness, into a quiet appreciation of the transient beauty that life offered and took back. When you accept impermanence, control stops being your goal. Instead, participation becomes your practice. You no longer grasp at people or outcomes. You give yourself to each moment completely, knowing it will pass. And because you know it will pass, you love it more fiercely. The flower is most beautiful because it wilts. The song is most moving because it ends. In this way, impermanence teaches compassion. You start to see that everything you meet, every person, every creature, every breath, is on its way to becoming something else. That shared destiny makes judgment fade and tenderness grow. Watts often concluded his talks about impermanence with laughter. He found it amusing that humans cling to control when they themselves are made of change. "You are not a stranger in the universe," he said. "You are the universe happening." When you see life in that way, impermanence stops being an external force acting upon you. It becomes your own nature. You are not the observer of the flow. You are the flow itself. To live in the flow of impermanence is to let life pass through you like wind through open hands. It is to stop trying to make moments last and instead let them live their full life before they dissolve. It is to love without fear, to grieve without bitterness, and to begin again and again, each time softer, freer, more aware. In the end, spiritually awake people are not detached from life. They are immersed in it. They feel deeply because they know nothing can be held forever, and that paradoxically makes every heartbeat infinite. Impermanence does not take away meaning. It creates it. Without endings, there could be no beauty, no urgency, no gratitude. The flow of impermanence is the great teacher that shows us how to love fully, lose gently, and live without resistance. When you finally stop fighting the current and allow it to carry you, you discover that the river was never against you. It was always you, moving, changing, alive. Chapter 13. The freedom to be whole. At some point in the journey of awakening, you realize that what you have been seeking was never something to be found, but something to be uncovered. The natural completeness that was buried beneath layers of conditioning, fear, and desire. This moment does not come with fireworks or revelation. It arrives quietly, often after loss, solitude, and surrender. You stop trying to fix yourself, or to earn love, or to justify your worth, and for the first time you simply are. Alan Watts often said that awakening is not about becoming divine or transcendent. It is about becoming natural. To be whole, he reminded us, is not to be perfect. It is to stop dividing yourself into pieces, The part that deserves love, the part that doesn't, the self that is seen, and the self that is hidden. It is to live without apology in the totality of your being. For most of us, fragmentation begins early. We learn to present only the acceptable parts, the polite smile, the achievements, the versions that earn approval. The rest gets tucked away in shadow. We suppress anger to be liked, silence our sadness to seem strong, perform happiness to be accepted. Over time, these fragments become so convincing that we mistake them for our identity. We start living as characters in a story that doesn't belong to us, forgetting that wholeness is not something we achieve, but something we return to. The spiritually awake person begins to sense this return as a kind of homecoming, a remembering of what was never truly lost. Watts explained that wholeness is not about purification, it's about integration. To be whole is to let the light and shadow coexist, to allow both joy and pain to have their rightful place. The mind, in its quest for control, tries to choose. It wants peace without chaos, love without vulnerability, success without failure. But the soul knows that opposites exist only in relation to one another. There is no light without darkness, no sound without silence. The spiritually awake do not chase the positive and avoid the negative. They hold both in balance. They stop cutting their experience in half. In doing so, they discover that peace is not found in one side of the coin, but in the coin itself. Psychology mirrors this truth in what Carl Jung called individuation, the process of integrating the unconscious parts of the psyche into awareness. Jung believed that true maturity arises when a person embraces both their persona and their shadow, when they no longer hide from their own contradictions. Watts often referenced this idea, saying that you don't get rid of the devil by fighting him, you integrate him. Spiritual wholeness is the same. It's not about silencing your flaws or erasing your history, but about recognizing that every part of you has served a purpose. Even pain, when seen clearly, becomes a teacher. When you begin to live from this wholeness, the burden of pretending falls away. You no longer need to curate yourself for acceptance. You stop apologizing for your sensitivity or hiding your uncertainty. You allow your feelings to move through you like weather, rain, wind, sunlight, knowing none of them define you. There is tremendous freedom in this. You realize that authenticity is not a performance of truth, but the absence of performance altogether. Life becomes lighter because you no longer carry the weight of being someone you're not. Watts often described human beings as waves in the ocean. Each wave has its own form and rhythm, yet none exist apart from the sea. To be free, he said, is to recognize yourself as the ocean, not just the wave. The spiritually awake person understands this, that their individuality is real but not separate. They can celebrate their uniqueness without mistaking it for isolation. Wholeness, then, is not about blending into the collective, but about knowing that the boundaries between self and world are softer than we've been taught. Every breath, every thought, every heartbeat participates in something larger. When love enters the life of someone who has found this wholeness, it feels different. Love no longer arrives as a rescue mission or a possession. It becomes a meeting of two whole beings who reflect awareness back to one another. You do not seek in another what you have denied in yourself. You simply recognize yourself in them. This is what Watts meant when he said that the true self is not something inside you, but something that is everything outside you. The boundaries dissolve. Connection becomes effortless. When you are whole, love becomes an act of generosity, not survival. Wholeness also changes your relationship with solitude. Being alone no longer feels like deprivation. It feels like intimacy. You begin to enjoy your own company not out of arrogance, but out of peace. You can sit in silence without reaching for distraction because you no longer need to escape your own presence. The noise of self-doubt fades, replaced by a quiet familiarity. You start to trust your inner rhythm. When to act, when to rest, when to say yes or no. Decisions become simpler because they emerge from alignment rather than obligation. This is the freedom Watts spoke of. When you stop trying to be what you think you should be, you can finally be what you are. Freedom and wholeness are inseparable. Fragmentation breeds control, the need to hold, to prove, to protect. Wholeness, on the other hand, breeds trust. You trust that life will move as it must, that relationships will evolve as they should, that joy and pain will visit when it's time for them to teach. You stop fighting the current because you know that the river and the swimmer are not two. This trust doesn't make life easier, it makes it real. You no longer demand certainty from a world built on change. You simply flow. This freedom also reshapes how you see others. When you have embraced your own complexity, you become gentler with the contradictions in others. You stop dividing people into categories, good or bad, right or wrong. You begin to see that everyone is carrying their own fragments, their own unspoken stories. Compassion arises naturally because you recognize yourself in them. Love stops being a selective emotion and becomes an underlying awareness. Watts described this as the ability to see yourself without judging and to see others without separating. In the flow of daily life, this wholeness manifests as quiet confidence. You can engage with the world without losing your center. Whether you're alone or surrounded by people, at peace or in uncertainty, a subtle steadiness remains. You no longer chase balance as something to maintain. You are the balance. You've integrated the opposites, so there's nothing left to fear. That's why spiritually awake people radiate calm. Their serenity isn't the absence of chaos, but the inclusion of it. They have stopped running from themselves. The freedom to be whole is perhaps the most ordinary, and yet the most radical thing in the world. It's not about renouncing society, achieving enlightenment, or living without pain. It's about the simple courage to exist as you are. Messy, evolving, unpolished, alive. Watts often ended his talks by reminding people that awakening is not a destination. You are already it, he said. You just pretend that you're not. To be whole is to end that pretense. It's to let the masks drop and realize that nothing was missing. Not in you, not in life. You see that every joy and sorrow, every moment of love and solitude, every loss and rediscovery was part of the same unfolding. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was wrong. You were never broken, only incomplete in your own eyes. When that illusion falls away, what remains is freedom. The freedom to simply be, to participate in life as yourself, without shame, without division, and without fear. That is the quiet, profound wholeness that Alan Watts tried to show us all along. Chapter 14. The Return to Silence. There comes a point, after all the seeking, after all the questions, when words start to feel unnecessary. Not because you've found every answer, but because you've realized the answers were never the point. Life, as Alan Watts often said, is not a riddle to be solved, but a song to be heard. The closer you come to understanding yourself and the world, the quieter you become. The noise of striving fades, the inner commentary slows, and what remains is something ancient and simple: silence. Not the silence of absence, but of presence, a fullness that doesn't need to explain itself. The journey towards spiritual awakening often begins with noise, the noise of thought, of confusion, of trying to understand who we are and what we should do. We spend years chasing clarity through books, people, philosophies, and experiences. We search for patterns that can explain suffering, meaning, and love. But as awareness deepens, the need for explanations softens. You begin to see that life has been speaking to you the whole time, through breath, through beauty, through impermanence, and that silence was never empty. It was listening. The spiritually awake person does not retreat from the world into silence. They return to it. Watts described silence not as an absence of sound, but as the background that allows sound to exist, the stillness in which all movement happens. Without silence, music would be impossible. Without stillness, life would have no rhythm. Yet most people live as if silence were an interruption, something to be filled as quickly as possible. We turn on music, talk, scroll, plan, anything to escape the quiet. But silence, when truly entered, is not a void to be avoided. It is the home of awareness itself. It's what remains when all distractions fall away. When you begin to rest in that silence, you discover a kind of peace that is not dependent on circumstance. It's not the peace of things going well or emotions aligning. It's the peace of being itself. You sit still, and life simply is. The mind, which has spent years chasing purpose, falls quiet not because it's been defeated, but because it's finally seen through its own illusion, the belief that peace is something to acquire. The spiritually awake person realizes that peace was never lost. It was only obscured by noise. In this silence, even thought becomes gentle. You can still think, plan, and create, but the thoughts don't control you anymore. They arise like ripples on the surface of a vast lake, part of the movement, but not the essence. Watts often compared awareness to the sky. Clouds pass through, storms come and go, yet the sky remains untouched. Silence is that sky. It is not something you achieve, it is something you remember. When you are quiet enough, you start to hear it, not with your ears, but with your whole being. This is why spiritually awake people often appear calm even in chaos. Their silence is not withdrawal, it's rootedness. They are not numbed or detached. They are listening. They can be fully engaged in conversation, in work, in love. Yet somewhere beneath it all, there is a still current of quiet running through them. That quiet is what allows them to stay present, to respond rather than react, to see rather than judge, to love without clinging. Silence becomes their ground, not because they seek escape, but because they've recognized that silence has always been part of every sound. Science has begun to glimpse this truth in its own way. Studies show that moments of deep quiet reset the brain's sensory pathways, reducing anxiety and improving focus. Silence, quite literally, reorganizes the nervous system. But beyond biology, silence reorganizes the soul. It softens the edges of identity until you no longer feel like a separate self navigating a hostile world. You begin to sense that the same stillness within you exists in everything, in trees, in oceans, in the space between stars. You are not standing in silence. You are part of it. When you reach this understanding, solitude takes on a new depth. You no longer need the company of others to feel alive, nor do you reject it. You move through the world as though every encounter arises out of the same stillness. The need to impress, to explain, to justify dissolves. Presence itself becomes your language. You can sit beside someone in silence and feel more connected than in hours of conversation. Words become tools for sharing, not shields for hiding. Silence, paradoxically, makes communication more honest. Watts often spoke about laughter and silence as siblings. Both arise when the mind sees the futility of trying to control existence. When you finally stop taking the self so seriously, laughter and silence arrive hand in hand. Laughter comes first, the joy of seeing through illusion, and silence follows, the peace of resting beyond it. Together, they form the final chapter of awakening, not transcendence but ease. You live as awareness, not as a seeker. You don't try to hold life anymore. You let it move through you, knowing it was never separate from you in the first place. The return to silence also changes how you understand love. Love stops being a word, a promise, or a performance. It becomes the quiet recognition that there is no other to love. When you meet another person, you are meeting the same awareness wearing a different face. There's no need to demand, to prove, or to hold. You simply appreciate. Love becomes presence without possession, attention without agenda. It breathes in silence because silence has room for everything, for joy, for pain, for impermanence. In this space, even death loses its sting. Watts often reminded his audience that death is not the opposite of life. It is part of it. The silence we return to is not nothingness. It's the same stillness from which everything arises. To fear death is to fear silence, and to fear silence is to fear seeing who you really are. When you finally make peace with quiet, you make peace with all endings, because you've realized that what ends is only the form, not the essence. Awareness, like silence, continues. To return to silence is not to abandon life, but to embrace it fully. You speak when needed, act when called, love when moved, and through it all, the quiet remains. It is the companion beneath every experience, the listener behind every word. In that recognition, striving ends. The journey you thought would take a lifetime leads you back to the place you never left. And so the spiritually awake person walks gently through the world. They no longer rush to find meaning because they are resting in it. They no longer chase love because they have become it. Silence is no longer emptiness but fullness. The hum of being that vibrates through all things. It is the final lesson and the first truth. When all questions dissolve and all seeking subsides, what remains is not nothing, but everything, clear, boundless, and still. That is the return to silence. Not an escape, not an ending, but the simple, radiant recognition that life has always been whole, and you have always been home.